Let's now take a look at the oscillator section. I'm going to unlock this patch, go into the BEAP category, and under scope, I'm going to bring in this big scope. Let's take the output of the oscillator and plug that into the signal input on the scope so we will be able to visualize it. I'll lock the patch and click on Smart so that'll try to fit the shape into the screen over here. All right, unlock the patch again. Let's go into BEAP and under all, the very first device here, let's bring this in. So we will use this to analyze the frequency content of the signal. So I'll take the output from the signal and plug that to the signal input on this analyzer. I'm also going to take the 1 volt per octave output from the keyboard and put that in here. So that'll also help us to get a good reading on this module. All right, so let's lock the patch. Let's start with a sine wave. I'm going to set this to external. So a sine wave, as you can see here in the oscilloscope, looks like a sine shape. If I play a note, ignoring the clicks and pops, so you're hearing this very pure tone because that's a sine wave. A sine wave just has a fundamental frequency. Fundamental frequency is the frequency that you're playing. So if I'm playing A440, you're basically just hearing that frequency, nothing else. There are no harmonics in here. So that's a sine wave, a very, very pure tone. The next shape we have here is a triangle. A triangle, as you can see, looks like a triangle. It sounds slightly buzzier. Again, ignoring those clicks and pops. So sounds slightly buzzier compared to the sine shape. And ignore the fact that it's also a bit softer. We can always adjust the volume after the fact. But you'll also notice in the spectrum analyzer that it has additional harmonics. That's why it sounds slightly buzzier. So if we were to label these harmonics as odd and even, so let's say this is the first harmonic, then there's a second harmonic which is actually missing, third harmonic, fourth harmonic is missing, fifth harmonic, so on and so forth. So in a triangle shape, you only have odd harmonics. The even harmonics are missing. And of course, the level of all the harmonics gets softer and softer really quickly. Right? Let's move on to a square shape. A square shape has a similar frequency spectrum when compared to the triangle. It only has odd harmonics, but obviously, as you can see, the odd harmonics are a lot louder. Let's hear this. All right, so right now we're hearing the sound filtered because it's going through the filter. So I'll just bypass this and let's listen to the waveforms again. So obviously with a sine wave, having a filter or not having a filter is not going to make any difference because there's nothing there to filter. Let's hear the triangle. So it's still very mellow, but the square, you can hear it's a lot brighter because the harmonics are a lot louder. And again, it only has odd harmonics. It's called a square because it literally looks like a square shape. Now, within the square, you have, it's actually within the category of a pulse shape. So the square waveform is a type of a pulse shape. It's called square because the positive phase and the negative phase are equal in terms of the width. So we also call this pulse width. It's hard to see this, but if I was to play a lower octave, so you can see the positive as well as the negative, the duty cycle is equal. So the pulse width is set to 50%. If I change this, let's set this tuning back to 0. So if I change this anywhere aside from 50%, if you look at the spectrum analyzer, you'll notice that we're now introducing other harmonics, specifically those even harmonics. So a square shape is a very specific kind of a pulse shape where the pulse width is equal, the duty cycle, the positive and negative, they're equal, and it only has odd harmonics. If you change that, we're going away from that shape. Now, what does it sound like? So that's your square shape, but if I was to change the pulse, let's say I make it a bit more narrow. So you can hear tonally it sounds a lot different. Alright, so the last shape here is a sawtooth shape. It looks like a sawtooth, that's why it's called a sawtooth. And if you look at the spectrum analyzer, we have all harmonics. So we have the odd as well as even harmonics. But of course, as we go higher, the higher harmonics get softer and softer. So a sawtooth tends to sound buzzier when compared to a square shape, which sounds a lot more hollow. So those are the different waveforms that we get here. These are the standard analog waveform shapes, but in digital synthesizers, you may get a lot more options. This offset is basically a pitch control. So it's set in semitones right now, 0 meaning no change of pitch, but I can enter in 12. So now it's going to be an octave above. I can enter in minus 12, octave below, so on and so forth. You can also click over here and switch to frequency. So instead of setting the parameter in semitones or setting an offset in semitones, you can set the frequency of the oscillator in hertz. So that's the oscillator section. Next, let's check out the filter.